Tonka Bay Council member Adam Jennings is running for the Minnesota Senate. He lives in Minnesota District 33. The Democrats call it the Fighting 33rd. Welcome to Democratic Visions.
Thanks, Jeff. It's good to be here again.
How long ago did you decide to take on Dave Osmek, the incumbent?
Well, yeah, no, I decided to run last spring. It was probably around April or May. There was an issue that he had brought forward with the LMCD. He wanted to make a change to the Lake Minnetonka Conservation District. The LMCD, or the Lake Minnetonka Conservation District, was a charter that was created in 1967, which standardized lake activity for the 14 cities that sit on Lake Minnetonka. Yeah. And it basically prevented, one city from being able to dump raw sewage into it and affecting all of the other cities who would effectively have no say over that. And it's been sailing along for a number of years without any changes. And anyway, this last spring, Senator Osmek brought a change forward, which would have made anything above the ordinary high water mark the responsibility of the cities.
Sure.
And it's one of those things, I think people can argue about the effectiveness of the LMCD and whether or not the changes need to occur. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a conversation that probably does need to happen.
Yeah.
But the way you do that is you include all of the stakeholders into the conversation when you do that. And the way this bill was pursued, it was quietly being attached to an omnibus bill. My sitting on city council, none of us had heard of it prior to.
Really?
Yeah, and I felt like it was important for us to have a wider conversation, and that wasn't happening.
Did the bill go through?
It did.
It did.
It did because it was attached to an omnibus bill.
Okay.
And there was very little discussion that occurred. By the time we had received wind of it, I tried to intervene with a few other folks as a citizen, and we went to some of the testimony that was occurring at the state capitol. The senator had indicated that he had spoken to most of the cities, and they were either in favor of the change or agnostic to it. And that just simply wasn't the case. Tonka Bay certainly hadn't heard about it. And I think there were at least 2 or 3 other cities that formally came out with resolutions after the fact indicating that they were not in favor of the changes. So if you're going to make changes, the punchline here is essentially have a conversation about it. Don't run it. Don't get testimony from 2 people and a lobbyist, call it good, and attach it to an omnibus. So I want the lake to be central to my campaign. It does. There are a number of reasons why. It has a lot of environmental factors. We need to be cognizant of oversight and how we're going to resolve invasive species that are in the lake. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the lake itself is kind of the Metro's playground, at least the West Metro. And I think the responsibility to take care of the lake falls on the shoulders of the residents when, it's one of the busiest lakes in the entire state. We have boats coming from all over, outstate, other states, and certainly the rest of the Metro. And I think the state of Minnesota has an obligation to step in and assist with that. And we should at least be having that conversation, and I don't think that's occurring right now.
Well, Tonka Bay sits on Highway 19. Lake Minnetonka is on both sides of it. But Senate District 33 begins in the south down in Chanhassen and goes way north, too. It's a huge area.
Yeah, geographically, it's one of the largest Senate districts in the 3rd Congressional. The lake affects only one portion of the overall district, largely 33B. But we want to run a campaign that talks about affordable health care. Certainly there was the Alex Smith Emergency Insulin Act, which lost by a single vote in the Senate in the last session. And that would have provided insulin for anyone who had type 1 diabetes that didn't have the ability to pay for their insulin due to some sort of economic concern. Mm-hmm. They could go to their pharmacist and get a 1-month emergency supply. I believe my opponent, he did vote against it. His rationale was some platitude about market forces. And I'll tell you right now that if we're going to talk about free market, it doesn't make sense to me that you can buy a vial of insulin in Canada for $40, and here in Minnesota you get the exact same vial of insulin and it's $400. We need to go into the Minnesota legislature. We need to address this and try and flatten those prices out so that there truly is market competition.
I want to know what other issues your future constituents are concerned with and what you're going to go to bat for.
Yeah. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I feel like my values weren't being represented in the district, and there are a number of issues that come with that, to include affordable health care, sensible gun legislation, and environmental policies as well.
Talk about sensible gun legislation.
Sensible gun legislation includes universal background checks. I mean, specifically, that's with regards to closing the loophole at gun shows. It's just to make sure that law-abiding citizens who have the capability of purchasing weapons have the opportunity to do so, and those who don't, can't. I think if you take a look at some of the polling that's been done, I think upwards of 90% of Minnesotans agree with this approach. Likewise, I think red flag laws make a lot of sense. These have been passed in other states. They've gone to the courts. They've been upheld, and ultimately, at the end of the day, it protects people who are suicidal. They make up a vast majority of the gun violence that occurs in this country. And right behind that is women who are affected by domestic violence. If you take a look at the empirical data, the people who are being affected by this, it's men attacking women and not the other way around. And this would effectively, it gives someone the opportunity to, if there's a concern, they can call the local authorities. Those local authorities then go to a judge who has to issue a warrant. And then those weapons can be confiscated for a small period of time while individuals are being helped. I'll add real quickly too, when it comes to suicide, I think the stats that are out there that those individuals who use a firearm to do that have a 90% success rate, whereas if they use a different mode to try and end their own life, it's much lower. And they found in a number of follow-up interviews that people who attempt to commit suicide oftentimes change their mind after the fact. And guns are they're a very final solution to a problem that I think we need to address.
Affordable health care is also a concern to all of us right now. What are you going to do in the Minnesota Senate?
I think there are a couple of things. One, there's low-hanging fruit out there, like the Alex Smith Emergency Insulin Care Act that needs to be passed, and I think that's something that we can just get done. Mm-hmm. The other thing that the House has approached that I think makes a lot of sense is just transparency. There are some quick wins we can make, and let's get transparency in pricing. So there are a number of inconsistencies in pricing, and right now the average consumer has no idea how they're being charged. They get a bill in the mail, and a lot of times the number's pretty big, and there's no justification for that number. I think the House has done some really good work trying to pass bills to provide additional transparency so that we can identify where inefficient places occur. And I think once we have a better understanding of inefficiencies within the marketplace, we can then take a closer work with health organizations to have better overall pricing in the market.
Adam, we've talked about Lake Minnetonka. That is really important for your district. You're an environmentalist. You're also very, very concerned to address climate change challenges. What are you going to do in the Senate?
So the first thing we need to do is we need to talk about carbon. We need to do everything that we can to pass legislation that minimizes the emission of carbon. The House has come up with a number of good proposals, and I think they're just trying to work their way through the Senate right now. Now, my opponent, he has come out and he's talked about something to the effect of everyone agrees that we need less carbon.
Yeah.
But you know what he doesn't do? He doesn't say why.
Can you answer why?
It's because we're not taking carbon seriously. If you take a look at, Xcel Energy. Xcel Energy knows that we need to get away from coal. One, it burns too much carbon. Two, it actually doesn't make economic sense either. So we have an opportunity to move into renewable energies in a renewable space that's cost effective and makes sense for Minnesotans. We need to talk about money in politics, and where that money comes from. I do not accept money from PACs or special interest groups. My opponent does. 10% of all of the money that he received in 2019 came from a political group whose spokesperson has a business in Minnesota that's called Minnesotans for Global Warming, Incorporated.
Minnesotans for Global Warming?
That's correct.
You're kidding me.
No, and
I know you have a sense of humor, but you're not joking now,
so
right?
they have a website
Yeah.
that says I think their tagline is "Make Minnesota Miami," and I think it's important for my opponent to.
What does that mean? Make Minnesota Miami?
I think
mean, you're not a member of that group, of course. But
no,
what do you
of course,
think that means?
I'm not. I'm not sure. Perhaps we're going to go fishing for bass at some point in time in the future when it's too warm for northern and walleye to live in the lakes anymore.
Sure, yeah.
But I think their response, if I were to guess or speculate, is something to the effect of they don't want to politicize the weather. So here's where I'm confused.
Yeah.
If we don't want to politicize the weather, then why are we putting forth clean energy bills? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. And my opponent, he'll talk about carbon in the atmosphere, but he does not talk about why we have an issue with carbon in the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And when we get back to where money is coming from, a significant number of donors to his campaign come from, extremely dirty coal-burning facilities.
Some are Minnesota companies?
I think we've got some smaller co-ops here in the state that are using older technology that burns dirtier coal. But if you take a look at Excel, for example, Excel Energy has come forward. They have indicated that coal burning is not part of our future. It is not cost effective. They have actually approached the Public Utilities Commission, the PUC, so that they can burn less coal. They can't make any changes without public approval, and they want to move away from it. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to follow their lead. I think we have a real opportunity here to develop a sustainable renewable infrastructure in Minnesota. Take a look at Golden Valley, for example, Mortenson. If you remove the actual manufacturers from this equation, like First Solar, the individuals that create wind products, solar products, and you just take a look at installation, Mortenson is the country's largest installer of renewable facility, like farms and solar farms across the country. Mm-hmm. And they have a significant market share in maintenance as well. And those are real jobs right here in Minnesota. That's the growing industry. It makes sense for us. It's something we need to continue to embrace. I'll add as well that it's very important that we don't start to erode the current standards that we've already put in place. So there's this clean energy bill first, clean energy first bill, that is being introduced in the Senate right now. And it wants to redefine what carbon-free means. So I think to a lot of us, carbon-free means just that, it's carbon-free. But they want to make it only 80% carbon-free. That's what the new legal standard would be.
Well, the world doesn't have that much more time to deal with this stuff. We've got to get it done right now, correct?
Correct. I'm tired of the games.
Yeah.
We're dealing with some really complicated issues. We need to sit down at the table with all stakeholders and have serious conversations. And the only way that we're going to get to something that works for all stakeholders is to be able to reach across the aisle, have bipartisan conversations, and you don't do that by calling people names like my opponent does.
Oh yeah, he's really good at that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, this comes back down to one of the main reasons I'm running. I think this is ultimately a question of character. I feel like I have the leadership and the experience, but frankly also the demeanor to work with other people to get things done. I've done it on city council. I just got elected to my second term as chair of the Excelsior Fire District, which includes and services 5 cities in the 33rd. Mm-hmm. And we do great work. I work with people of all stripes. And at the end of the day, it's about getting things done. You need to have conversations and develop solutions.
And I also like you because you were in the Minnesota Army National Guard.
Yes, sir.
And you've done some factory work too in your life too.
I did. So I put myself through the University of Minnesota, working the line at the Ford Twin Cities Assembly Plant. I was a member of the UAW there. It was a fantastic job. While I was there, September 11th happened, and I felt it was very important for me to get involved and do something. So I joined the Minnesota Army National Guard. I was deployed. I came home and my life hit a completely new gear. I got married to this amazing pediatrician.
Megan?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And
you've got 2 children, right?
Yes, we do. My daughter, she's in 2nd grade. My son is about to start kindergarten next year.
Are you a cat family or a dog family or
Definitely a dog family.
Definitely a dog family.
Yeah,
okay.
We have a Emma. She's a kind of a black lab mix. We're not sure. We got her from a rescue back in 2009.
Okay, good. Our crew was at the grand opening at Dean Phillips's re-election campaign office in Minnetonka. And Dean has an old milk truck or something like that he drives around. You have a truck too.
Well, if you've got good ideas, we're just going to steal the page from his playbook on this. Hey there, Jeff.
Hey, welcome to BCAT.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Now, granted, this is my personal vehicle, so I get to drive it as much as I want and wherever I want, and it's been great. We're getting a lot of feedback from it, and these aren't necessarily folks that are really ingrained in party politics either. These are just general constituents who are out and about, and they'll either come up and talk to me about the truck or even my wife or friends or other folks. So we've been getting a lot of good coverage. So I had to go with Ford on this because I'm a Ford guy.
Oh yeah, you used to work in that plant over there in St. Paul. Yeah.
It's my Ford F-250, and we wrapped it in green.
It used to be red, correct?
Yeah, it did until we wrapped it in Wellstone green. So
Wellstone green.
I'll be honest, that's a tip of the hat to Paul Wellstone, who continues to be a personal hero of mine. I have a lot of respect. Whether you agreed with him or not, the one thing that you always knew about Paul Wellstone was where he stood. And I will take that with me every single day of representation in the district. I can assure you that we won't always necessarily agree, but you'll always know where I stand, and you'll always know that I'll be respectful about it as well. At the end of the day, we have to have dialogue, and given the current state of politics that we have right now, we've got to get back to a place where we learn how to talk to one another again and have civil discourse, even when we aren't necessarily on the same page.
We agree. Adam, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff.
Look for me on Highway 19, okay?
Can do.
Give me a thumbs up.
Yep, can do.
I'll give you one of these.
Perfect.
Very good.
Jeff, I appreciate it, always.
Thank you.
Democratic Visions is handcrafted by volunteers from Eden Prairie, Edina, Minnetonka, Hopkins, and Bloomington. Watch us on select community access channels and on YouTube. This is Carol Sundstrom.